First things first, as I record this on Wednesday, April the 30th, Alabama just got a commitment this morning by Keitenn Bristow from Tarleton State. So Keitenn Bristow commits this morning from Tarleton State. He's the WAC Player of the Year, Freshman Player of the Year, 6'8", 190. People have had him listed somewhere between 6'7" and 6'10". I'm going to say somewhere in that 6'7", 6'8" range because obviously a lot of basketball players and sites like to overinflate the heights of these guys. But a guy that's really, really long, right? When I was actually looking up the different photos for the thumbnail for this, it was super difficult to find some where his arms are just not, taking up a huge percentage of the picture, right? He's a really long, lanky guy, somebody that I think that in a professional, or Power 5 weight room like Alabama has, nothing against Tarleton State, but I think with the strength and conditioning and the nutrition and everything that Alabama has at its disposal, I think that we can add some weight to him, and his body and frame can hold some extra weight. I think that will help him. I think where Alabama's going to want to play him is that 4 role, maybe a larger 3 in certain schemes. I don't think he's quite big enough to play a small ball 5. On the current roster, I think if you're going to play a small ball 5, I think that's going to be Taylor Bowen. I think he would be your small ball 5. But, in theory, you could have Bristow play it. I just don't think in the SEC with the athletes that we have and the physicality that we have, I don't think that he's going to be quite big enough to play that. So I would look at him more as a 3-4 role, obviously to fill some of that spot that we had from Jaron Stevenson leaving the roster, as well as a guy like Darion Reed leaving the roster. I think he more slots into that role. And what it gives us is it gives us another guy who's played some college basketball. Because one thing this roster does not have when you talk about the depth is a ton of guys outside of the starters that have played a lot of college basketball, especially at that wing spot, right? Currently, the wings who you have on the roster is Davion Hannah, Amari Allen, London Jemison. You've got these guys that are going to play well, and I feel very confident in their abilities. However, they're freshmen, right? In SEC and in high major college basketball, I don't think they're relying on a freshman to be your main wing and main distributor in that sense is what you want to do. Do I think that they could have successful seasons and can be really good? Of course, right? Obviously everybody's going to point back to your Brandon Millers of the world and, Cooper Flagg did it this past year, but those are kind of once in a generational type talents. I don't know that, obviously every team in college basketball would love to see that out of a freshman. I just don't know that's fully realistic to expect out of a freshman, right? So the more realistic thought of a freshman is that they're going to have their ups, they're going to have their downs, but it is somebody that, when they're going through that down slump, you don't need to have them be the only guy that you're relying on throughout the course of the season, right? So that's something that Bristow's at least going to give you. He's going to give you some extra depth from that standpoint. I think from a defensive standpoint, I think he has a lot of potential. A lot of the highlights that are floating around with him, there's a couple of blocks that he had on Keyshawn Hall against UCF. This is now going to be playing at Auburn, actually. His block rate was over 4.5%, which is really good at that size. Top 10 in the WAC. He's a good free throw shooter, 80%. Obviously, love to see that. From inside the arc, he's also a very good finisher. A ton of the photos and videos that I saw around him when I was kind of doing some research on this, he finishes strong around the rim, goes up strong, finishes with a lot of dunks. That's obviously really good to see. He shot 32% from 3 on 55 attempts. I think that number is going to go up. Obviously, in our system, you see a lot of guys that do well off catch and shoot. Their numbers go up a little more, especially because of just the way that Alabama gets you shots in our offense. You're not having to get that shot off of your own creation, as well as the emphasis being on the 3 and being able to space out the basketball. So I would expect that number to potentially go up a little bit, but 33% is a completely reasonable starting position for a guy of his size and a guy of his stature. So I'm not upset with what I'm seeing out of him. Obviously, this is much more of a depth and rotational piece. I would not expect him to be in the starting roster. Nothing against Bristow. I do think he's a good player, but I do not expect him to be in the starting roster, honestly, at really any point this season. If he is in the starting roster at some point this season, either something has gone incredibly well with him or something has gone horribly wrong with the roster, right? Either he's an all-world talent and, it's just over exceeding our expectations, or we've had some major issues with the roster and he's having to start because we've had injury issues or something of that sort. So, like I said, as of this moment today, as I record this at the end of April, I would not expect him to be your starting wing or starting four-man. Obviously, I think Taylor Bowen is your starting four-man. As of this moment, your starting wing looks like it's going to be Jalil Bethea. I don't know that that's going to be your starting wing. I think that Alabama's going to go after someone else. I don't know who that name is. We'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the show. But I'm personally of the mindset that it's going to be someone else. Obviously, Rylan Griffin's the name that a lot of people have floated out. That one's still very up in the air. I've heard good things and bad things on whether that one's going to go in Alabama's favor or if he's going to go to somewhere like Texas A&M. I think that there's a lot of things behind the scenes that are going on that may or may not cause that one to happen, right? We will see how it ends up shaking out, but as of today and as of this moment, not completely sure if that's going to be the case. I know I recorded last episode and said, hey, it looked like it was going to be the case. This situation with Ryland is super fluid, so like I said, I still would give it reasonable odds that he's back. I know that Ryland really wants to be back. There are some stipulations that I think the staff's trying to put on him, and I know both sides are kind of negotiating back and forth, and I'm just not sure how that one's going to fully end out. As of this moment, I would give it a coin flip as to if he's going to be back. We will see on that one. I have heard things on both sides of that coin, right? So, like I said, I do think Bristow is going to be a very good guy for us. I would expect him to contribute next season. I think that if he can come in and play a role, like I said, like we saw out of Jared Stevenson, obviously if he gives us that level, I think that he's overexceeded what our expectations are going to need to be for him this season. I think that he is going to be much more of a depth piece, but also a piece that is a developmental piece, right? A guy that I would expect to contribute decently well this season and have more contributing role than somebody that is a freshman would, but potentially be able to be a multi-year guy. And obviously in the transfer portal season class, and that's something that's hard to say. But when you look at the guys who are really leaving Alabama, it's guys that are looking for a different role than what Alabama has to offer them. Versus when you're looking at a transfer portal guy, in often case, Alabama's pitching them exactly the style and the position they're going to have on that team, right? So he's going to have the position on the team that Alabama has told him, like, hey, this is what we're bringing you in to do, and this is how we want to develop you. And as long as he enjoys and that's goes how he wants it to go, then in theory he could be back for the next season. And then when you have guys like that and you have guys that are multi-year guys in the system, think of like a Latrell Wrightsell. Obviously the next year it just gets better and better. Obviously we even saw jumps out of Jaron Stevenson and such in his next year in the system, out of Mo Diabate in his next year in the system, right? Both of those guys have left due to different reasons, but that's what you kind of want to see in today's transfer portal class. I would love to see a guy like Bristow obviously come on strong, do well for us this next season, but then obviously be a successful player for us for the next couple of years, because he is a guy that has the frame and that has the shooting and talent ability to be able to be a guy who could get drafted in a few years, right? With the development and with the shooting and what Alabama's going to be able to do for him, I think that he definitely would have that ability to get to the NBA, right? That's what a lot of these guys want to do. So those are kind of my thoughts around Keitenn Bristow. Like I said, I think a really good pickup. I'm excited to see how he's going to be in an Alabama roster. Obviously, it's going to be a step up in competition from the WAC, but I'm excited to see how he works out for Alabama.